I had presented on my story that I was going to interview Leah after we watched the American Grindhouse doc, the Elijah Drenner 2010 documentary. Her and I had sat down and had a conversation about it. I kind of wanted her to see my world and what it looked like, and 80-minute package, because a lot of times I try to explain some of these zany titles, and often there's a lot of wild card movies that I watch and a lot of stuff that's kind of countercultural, pick the decade. He's seemingly against the grain or a bit, wild. But I want to thank Claudia Ortega. She had put the little seed in my head about, hey, I want to hear your wife's take on it. Really happy that we got to watch it together, because I told you right after it, I feel heard. I ask your take on the documentary, which is streaming on Tubi right now. It's probably been there for a while, and I think Kino has it on a physical media release.
Documentary is called American Grindhouse.
American Grindhouse.
In case you're wondering.
I know you love digging into the history of things, and this was very targeted on the genesis of what Grindhouse films were, and I kind of wanted to get your take on it.
I would love to hear your definition of what a Grindhouse film is. Add a little bit more context to what we're talking about.
What a Grindhouse movie was the genesis of the carnival or the carnival barkers getting you to come see this insane vision, or saying that you were going to get this sensation when viewing said thing. This was all on film, movies that spoke to specific truths of the time in ways that you weren't normally used to hearing through a societal mainstream lens. So a lot of people my age or maybe a little bit younger may have seen the Robert Rodriguez, Quentin Tarantino movie Grindhouse, which came out on a double bill. And if you had the pleasure of watching it in theaters in 2007, it was a whole pastiche of modern day movies shot with the film grain of yesteryear, all the pops and cigarette burns. Sandwiched in between are lurid, salacious movie trailers of yesteryear too. But the clever hook from that movie was incorporating modern day actors and actresses, and sex and mixed sexualities and fluid genders and violence and attacks on women, attacks on men, touching on our cultural things in modern day society within any decade since the inception of film. But also the idea that Grindhouse movies were, in addition to what they would be programmers or second features at a drive-in from yesteryear, there was a lot of craft. A lot of people got their start in Grindhouse films. A lot of mainstream people that we know today kind of got their start. That's what I would describe Grindhouse. Sorry if that was a little tangential.
That's okay. What I would add to that is, and at least what I took away from the documentary as well, is that Grindhouse was mainly about exploitation. This was an exploitation of what you couldn't see mainstream. And so, like Charles was saying, exploitation of sex, exploitation of drug culture, of Black culture, of other subcultures, of violence, men and women, things that were very, I would even say, grotesque. It's things you watch or things you see or things you read that you don't really want other people knowing about. It's just kind of your own little guilty thing. Now it's in film form, and you're going to go see, this incredible violence or this incredible, even some action that was just, in some of it, way ahead of its time, very dangerous, but they would do it because it gets a reaction. And sometimes any reaction is a good reaction when it comes to Grindhouse. So it kind of provides a little bit more, I guess, context into what we're talking about here.
I felt like having to try to encapsulate it in a little paragraph it's such a wide.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into Grindhouse. Granted, I'm not as familiar with it as he is, obviously. I have seen, and especially in learning from this documentary, and like you mentioned, like the carnival barker, that was kind of like the genesis of Grindhouse, is when they would have these carnivals and they would have the quote unquote like freak shows where it's like, oh, come see this taboo or crazy thing that you've never seen before that is really hush hush and you can only see it here. That was where they got the inspiration essentially for Grindhouse. And so when they started making films in, what was one of the earlier ones?
Like the 10s.
Yeah, it was like 1913 or 1910, something like that. The very first like Grindhouse films. From there, like, well, I guess like we have to also kind of speak on, maybe I'm kind of going out of order of what you were wanting, the film industry codes, and how, I guess, lax they were a little bit originally. Like people could make whatever they, time went on, they're like, oh wait, no, it's for mainstream, maybe we shouldn't be showing these types of things.
The Hays Code.
Yeah, and so like we add in all of these restrictions essentially, and they equated it kind of like to prohibition, where they put prohibition in place, and because of that, all of the speakeasies and the kind of underground bars and the production of alcohol and everything like that, like it was continuing, it was just behind the scenes. And so that was the same thing that was happening with Hays Code, so like film code, what you could or could not produce. And then because of that, even more Grindhouse was being created, because they're like, well, we're going to find ways around this if we can. So it really kind of exploded that genre.
I mean, a lot of you guys, our age group, the most recent chapter in that book for you would be like, oh, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I've always heard about that. You know, some might say, I mean, Halloween became so mainstream, but even in 78, I mean, it's one of the biggest independent grossing movies of all time, but that would be considered, you know. It had hundreds upon hundreds of ripoffs. I mean, I know Terror on Tape is kind of like a third or fourth Bible, as I've said, for me. So for you guys, for many people watching this, the touchstone would be like Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Last House on the Left.
Last House on the Left from 72. It kind of dovetails into this idea about when something happens in culture, tend to react to what happens in culture. So like the Vietnam War was a nightmare. Kennedy getting shot and all of these things. And on the American homeland, it was showing a reaction to the youth of the day, or clashing parent-child values and clashing values in general. So it was really interesting. So a lot of people would equate Last House on the Left. Many of you probably know the remake and its sequels. But when Last House on the Left came out in the 70s, I mean, it's still quite grotesque to this day. But there's always two layers on a sociological level. Last House on the Left is a perfect example of one of these, what Grindhouse is. Late night cinemas, New York in the 70s on 42nd Street, the peep shows, the adult shows, but then movies that would just sit in theaters for 6, 8, 9 months, and people would be asleep in the movie aisles. Someone would be doing something they weren't supposed to. You know, that is an American Grindhouse in a nutshell. Do you think we have any examples of that today anymore?
Like a physical Grindhouse? Because there's a difference between a Grindhouse, I shouldn't say difference, they tie into each other, but a Grindhouse film and an actual like Grindhouse, like location.
Yeah,
so,
a dirt dog old theater.
Yeah, that was the Grindhouse, where they show the midnight features, and you're saying in New York on 42nd Street, 3 a.m., Lord knows what's playing, but people are going in there to sleep, to do other things. Like, yeah, the film is playing, and it kind of is also it's an irony of going to a Grindhouse to see a Grindhouse film. Like, they're mirrors of each other. Like, you're in the location watching the mirror of what you're doing in the location.
It eventually became, in many ways perceived salacious culture, but in many ways stuff was happening. You know, some moments, you know, people were attacked in theaters, some people were lonely, you know, ne'er-do-wells, whatever, what have you, but there was such a rich culture there. Bill Lustig, Brian De Palma, greats that came from the 70s and started making movies in the 70s, Scorsese being one of them, who's arguably, still killing it with all of his stuff to this day. I thought it was just fascinating to bond with you, honey, because it's so hard. You see so many titles, watching probably hundreds of different movies. I know it's hard to keep track, but this was really fun to watch American Grindhouse on Tubi. If you guys are ever interested in it, I thought it was pretty fascinating. A lot of these movies are really good. And a lot of these movies leave a residue. And I come back to many a Grindhouse movies often a lot more times than coming back. I'm just, there's a whimsy there. There's the plot twist, crazy twisty turny, and I love that. I'm really happy that we got to do this. And thank you for your time. And
Yep. And on-screen kiss.
Oh.